In the small village of Mörkdalen, nestled between spawned mountains and dense forests, Svartman Lake was a place that carried a mixture of fascination and fear among the inhabitants. Located a few kilometers from the village, the lake was a dark spot in Norway's icy lands. The waters were so deep that they seemed to absorb the light like a black hole. Older residents whispered dark stories about the lake, but few dared to talk about it openly. Erik Nordahl, a 38 fisherman, was known to be a practical and skeptical man. He had grown listening to legends over the lake, but always treated them as exaggerated folklore. Erik was the father of a 7-year-old girl, Hannah, and all she did was to give her a better future. His wife had died 3 years earlier, leaving Erik with the challenge of creating Hannah alone. This made him determined, almost stubborn, to face any obstacle. And before we continue with this intriguing story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's go back to the story. One morning, Erik was called to help investigate a disappearance. A fishing boat had sunk on Svartman Lake at night. 2 young fishermen, Jonas and Martin, were missing. The residents were alarmed. It was said that both were experienced and knew the lake well. For Erik, it made no sense. "If the boat turned, why are there no wreckage?" he murmured while adjusting his heavy coat to the cold in the morning. Next to Erik was his childhood friend Casper, who was also a fisherman but had a foot on local superstitions. "Do you think they were the twins?" Casper asked, lowering his voice as if someone could hear. Erik just rolled his eyes. The twins were part of the legend of the lake. It was said that in the oldest days, 2 identical creatures inhabited the depths of Svartman. They said that when they appeared, they did exactly the same movements as a perfect reflection of each other. They were described as serpentant monsters with bright eyes like embers, large enough to break a boat in half. The story said that no one who had seen them lived to tell what really happened. When the 2 men arrived by the lake, something seemed different. The waters were calmer than normal, but the surrounding atmosphere was loaded. It was as if time stopped and the cold looked more penetrating. Erik put the boat in the water and invited Casper to enter. "Let's find out what happened. No monsters, we just need to find the bodies or wreckage," said Erik, trying to sound confident. As they paddled to the center of the lake, something began to disturb Erik. He felt a presence, as if he was being observed. Casper noticed his friend's discomfort and tried to calm him, telling a funny story, but the sensation persisted. When they reached the point where the boat had disappeared, Erik stopped paddling. "Strange, there is nothing here," he murmured. Casper looked at the water and widened his eyes. "Did you see this?" He pointed to the opposite side of the boat. Erik followed his friend's gaze but saw nothing. "Stop playing, Casper, that doesn't help," said Erik, visibly annoyed. Casper, however, was not kidding. His expression was of pure dread. Suddenly a deep sound echoed from the waters. It was like a muffled roar coming from the depths. The boat shook violently, almost knocking the 2 men in the water. Erik held on the edge as Casper shouted, "It's here! They are here!" It was then that Erik saw 2 pairs of red eyes emerged from the darkness. 2 huge and identical forms began to move under the boat, mirroring each other's movements. They were the twins of the Black Waters, and they were not there to play. The boat shook violently as Erik and Casper desperately tried to maintain balance. The serpentine creatures continued to surround the boat, creating swirls that pulled the small vessel to the center of the lake. Panic, Casper began to row back, but Erik knew that the strength of the creatures was greater than theirs. "2, let's sink like this," he shouted Erik, grabbing Casper's oars. "Do you want to stay here and wait for us to devour us alive?" Casper said, his wide, fixed eyes in the dark waters. That was when one of the creatures rose to the surface, revealing its shape completely. It had dark and scaly skin, red eyes that shone like embers, and a mouth full of sharp teeth like blades. The monster was immense, his body serpent through the waters like a living shadow. "My God," They are real, Casper whispered, the voice embargoed by terror. Eric, still trying to stay calm, looked around in search of any sign of the missing young people, Jonas and Martin. We need to know what happened to them. Maybe they are somewhere, clinging to some piece of wood. But the reality was hard. There were no wreckage, no bodies, only the void and the cold, and those two creatures watching them, as if the fate of men decided. Casper, listen. We need to go back, warn others. Prepare something to face it, whatever, said Eric, trying to look rational, even if he felt the same fear he saw in his friend's face. With a joint effort, they began to row back, with each paddling. Eric's heart beat faster, as if the water itself wanted to hold them there. When they finally reached the margin, the two fell in the snow, panting. The news spread fast. The village was divided between those who believed in creatures and those who thought fear had made Eric and Casper hallucinate. An old fisherman, Arvid, took the word in the small tavern where everyone gathered that night. I've seen these eyes once, many years ago. I lost my brother that day. No one believed me either, said Arvid, staring at Eric. These monsters are old, older than our memories. They protect something, or perhaps keep a curse. Eric felt a shiver. What could be so important in the depths of the lake to justify such terrible creatures? And why now, after so many years in silence, have they started attacking? The discussion intensified. Some wanted to set up a group and exterminate the monsters. Others thought it was better to close the lake, move away from it forever. Hannah, Eric's daughter, watched everything from a corner of the tavern. His childish curiosity mingled with the fear he felt for his father. That night, as Eric tried to calm her to sleep, she asked a question that echoed in his mind for a long time. Dad, why are they angry? Eric could not answer. Perhaps they were just primitive creatures defending their territory. Or maybe there was something darker at stake, something the village ignored for generations. In the following days, while some braver fishermen tried to resume fishing in other lakes, away from Svartman, Eric plunged into the old stories, seeking answers. He found disappearance records, reports of huge shadow sightings in the waters, but none explained the origin of the twins of Blackwaters. But then, one night, Arvid knocked on Eric's door with an old diary in hand. I found it in my grandfather's things. He always said that the key to appeasing the twins was in what they kept. Eric opened the diary, seeing yellow pages with almost illegible handwriting. But a phrase stood out, underlined several times. The eyes reflect the pain of the forgotten. Forgotten? Asked Eric, confused. There is a cave below the lake. They say it's an old tomb from a tribe that has been extinguished for centuries. Maybe they protect it, explained Arvid. A decision needed to be made. Risk everything on an expedition at the bottom of the lake, or keep living with terror in the waters, always fearing the next attack? Eric couldn't sleep that night. The sentence of the diary, the eyes reflect the pain of the forgotten, echoed in his mind like a dark riddle. He knew that if there was any chance to save Myrkdalen's village and avoid further disappearances, he would need to confront the creatures and find out what they kept. But the thought of descending at the bottom of Svartman Lake, even a possible submerged cave, made his spine freeze. The next morning, he gathered the most experienced fishermen in the village, including Casper and Arvid, to discuss the idea. The small group met in Eric's cabin away from curious ears. A rough map of the lake was placed on the table with an X indicating the point where the boat of missing young people had sunk. If there is really a cave down there, we need to find out what's inside it, Eric started, his voice firm. But that means someone will have to dive to the bottom. And we know that the twins won't let us pass without fighting. Are you crazy? He interrupted Casper, his face pale. They crushed a boat like paper. If we try to get down, we are dead. And if we don't try, they will keep killing, Eric countered. Today is the lake. Tomorrow, who knows, they come to us. Arvid, who seemed absorbed in thoughts, finally said, My grandfather said that the twins do not attack for no reason. If they are agitated, it is because something has been disturbed. Maybe someone has taken something they shouldn't. Eric frowned. Do you think Jonas and Martin may have found something? It's possible, said Arvid. If they took something out of the lake, it may have enraged the creatures. After much debate, the group decided to prepare for an expedition to the lake. They would need diving equipment, strings, and something to distract them if the twins appeared. Casper, still reluctant, suggested using raw meat to attract creatures away from the diving site. It won't work, said Arvid, dark. These things are not sharks. They are protecting something, and we are invading their territory. 2 days later, everything was ready. Eric and Casper would be the divers, while Arvid and 2 other fishermen would be on the boat, ready to pull them back if something was wrong. Hannah, curious and worried about her father, tried to follow him to the lake, but he sent her back with a promise. I'm going back, Hannah. I promise. When they arrived at Svartman Lake, the air seemed colder than usual. The group launched the boat and removed to the point marked on the map. The surface of the lake was so calm that it reflected the clouds like a mirror, but there was a tension in the air, as if the lake was watching them. Eric put on the diving equipment, feeling the weight of expectations on his shoulders. If something goes wrong, don't hesitate to pull the strings, he said, looking at Arvid. Casper, next to him, seemed to be on the edge of a collapse. I knew this was a bad idea, he murmured, adjusting the oxygen cylinder. So stay here, said Eric, already tired of his friend's complaints. If you are going to die down there, I'll go along, Casper said, trying to disguise fear with bravado. With one last look at the group on the boat, the 2 dived. The water was cold as ice, and the darkness wrapped them quickly. Eric lit his flashlight attached to his helmet, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the depths. They went down slowly, attentive to any movement. The silence was overwhelming except for the rhythmic sound of its breaths through the oxygen tubes. After a few minutes, they reached the back of the lake. The sand was black, covered by a layer of sludge. Eric examined the atmosphere with the flashlight until something caught his attention. An opening in the rock, large enough for a man to pass. The cave, he thought. As they swam towards the entrance, they felt a vibration in the water. Something was moving, and fast. Eric looked back and saw the shadows of the twins passing above them as predators pricked their prey. Casper, they are here! The 2 swim to the cave, barely managing to avoid the tails of the creatures that beat hard, creating powerful currents. When they finally entered, the monsters did not follow them, but remained around the entrance like faithful guardians. Inside the cave, the lantern light revealed something extraordinary. Prints on the walls, drawings that seemed to tell a story. There were human figures worshipping creatures similar to twins, offering being made. In the center of the cave was a stone pedestal, and over it something that looked like a jewel, shining with a supernatural light. Casper, look at that, said Eric, approaching the pedestal. This is what they are protecting. Casper answered, his voice shaking, but before Eric could touch the object, he felt a stronger vibration. It was as if the whole cave was alive, reacting to his presence. Suddenly, a figure emerged in water, a humanoid but ethereal form, as a spirit. She was a woman, with bright eyes and hair floating like algae. She looked straight at Eric, and a voice echoed in her mind. Forgotten should not be disturbed. The jewel belongs to the abyss. Return what was taken, or everyone will pay the price. Eric realized what had happened. Jonas and Martin had found something there, perhaps a second jewel, and as they took it off, they triggered the fury of the creatures. But now he needed to make a decision. Risk everything to return the lost jewel, or abandon the village to the terror of the black waters. The air inside the cave seemed denser, even underwater. Eric felt the weight of the look of the ethereal figure, a woman who seemed to be the manifestation of something older than anything he could understand. Casper, on the other hand, was paralyzed, pointing the fluttering flashlight to the engravings on the walls. The voice continued to echo in Eric's mind, although his lips remained clenched. Return what was taken, or the lake will continue to complain about lives. The forgotten do not forgive. Eric tried to think fast. What did she mean by what was taken? If Jonas and Martin had found another jewel, how could he recover her? He looked at Casper, who seemed about to crumble. "Casper, we need to get out of here and warn others. If what she's saying is true, the twins are angry because something has been stolen." Casper looked at Eric, his eyes full of panic. "Did you hear that? Did you hear her speaking in your head?" "Yes, I heard, but we don't have time for it now," Eric answered, holding Casper by the arm. He knew the cave could collapse at any moment, or worse, the twins could come in and end them. The two began to swim back into the cave entrance, but the creatures were there, blocking the way. The twins were even more terrifying closely, their scales glowing as metal in the lantern's light. They revolved around the entrance like living shadows, their red eyes shining with primitive but frighteningly calculated intelligence. "We are in prison," said Casper in despair. Eric analyzed the situation, looking for a solution. He knew that the twins were protecting the cave and what was in it, but for some reason, they did not attack within the sacred space. Perhaps there was a way to use this to your advantage. "Casper, they don't come in here. If we get close to the pedestal, we may be able to think of something." "Think about what, Eric? How to be dead more creatively?" Casper answered, the almost hysterical voice. Eric approached the pedestal again and stared at the bright jewel. Something about her seemed to attract her thoughts, almost as if she called him. He reached out his hand, hesitant, and when he touches it, a wave of images invaded his mind. He saw visions of an ancient civilization living around the lake, offering taxes to creatures to ensure their protection. But then something changed. The jewel, apparently a source of balance, was removed from the lake, and the chaos settled. The twins were not just monsters. They were guardians of something much bigger, something that kept the harmony between the lake and the world above. Eric retreated, panting. He knew what he needed to do. "Casper, we have to find the jewel that was taken. That's why they are furious. If we return it, maybe they stop attacking." "And how are we going to think that?" Casper exclaimed. "Do you think she will be floating on the lake, waiting for us?" Eric had no answer, but before he could say something, the ethereal voice echoed again in his mind. "Those who took what they do not belong to them paid with their lives. The object is where their blood joined with the waters." He immediately understood. The place where Jonas and Martin disappeared was where they needed to look. "I know where it is," said Eric firmly. Before leaving the cave, Eric looked at the ethereal figure one last time. "If we do that, will you stop?" The figure tilted his head as if he considered the question. "Balance will be restored, and the fury will cease, but the forgotten do not tolerate flaws." The warning breaded heavily over him as they swim back to the entrance. When they reached the opening, the twins were more agitated, as if they knew something had changed. Eric signaled Casper, indicating that they would swim as soon as possible. As they left the cave, the monsters chased them. It was as if the lake itself had come to life. Whirlpools formed by the tails of the creatures pulled them back. Eric and Casper swam with all their strength. While on the boat, Arvid and the other fishermen pulled the ropes urgently. When they finally emerged, Eric shouted, "Remember, we need to go to where the boat has disappeared." Arvid, confused, asked, "Why? What did you find down there?" "I explain later. Just trust me." As the boat advanced, the twins continued to follow, their shadows rising to the surface as a constant warning. When they arrived at the marked place, Eric dived again, this time alone. Casper, exhausted, was on the boat. The descent was quick, and Eric found what he was looking for. In the background, between the remains of Jonas and Martin's boat, was the lost jewel, shining weakly. He grabbed her, feeling a strange tingling in his hands, and began to rise. But the twins were there, prowling. One of them advanced, blocking his way. Eric didn't know what to do. Then, in a moment of pure despair, he raised his jewel above his head. The creature stopped, the red eyes fixed on the object. The voice echoed again. Return the balance. Restore what was lost. Eric understood. He needed to return the two jewelry to the pedestal in the cave. It was the only way to end it. The weight of the jewel in Eric's hands seemed bigger every second, as if he carried the destination of the entire village of Myrkdalen. As he swamped back, the twins continued to surround it, the red eyes shining like a constant warning. When he finally emerged, he raised his arm, showing the jewel to the men on the boat. "I achieved!" he shouted with his breath. Casper and Arvid pulled him into the boat. "Will this work?" Arvid asked, looking suspiciously at the brilliant object in Eric's hands. "I hope so," said Eric. "But we need to return this to the pedestal in the cave. It's the only way to end this." "And how are we going with these things chasing us?" Casper asked, pointing to the twins, who now swam in circles around the boat, creating whirlpools and shaking the vessel violently. Eric looked at Arvid, who was holding a reinforced fishing stick with a metal hook at the end. "We will distract them. You need to keep them away from the cave while I return it." Arvid hesitated, but finally nodded. "If that's what needs to be done, let's do." The boat began to move toward the cave entrance, but the twins became more aggressive, beating their huge tails against the water, lifting waves that almost turned the vessel. Eric knew they wouldn't have much time. "Now!" he shouted Eric, holding the jewelry before diving again. As he swam towards the cave, Casper and Arvid did their best to distract the creatures, throwing pieces of raw meat into the water and beating oars to create noise. For a few seconds, it seemed to be working. The twins hesitated, spinning toward the distractions. Eric entered the cave again, the heart beating rapidly. The glow of the jewel illuminated the way, and it swam quickly to the pedestal. When he arrived, he saw that the other jewel was still there, exactly where he had left. Carefully, he positioned the lost jewel next to the other. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was deafening, and Eric wondered if he had failed. Then an intense light exploded from the jewelry, illuminating the entire cave. The engravings on the walls began to shine, and Eric felt a wave of energy pass through his body, as if the lake himself was awakening. He retreated, watching as the jewelry seemed to merge into a single sphere of light. Outside, Casper and Arvid watched with horror as the twins plunged into the cave entrance, completely ignoring the distractions. "They go after him!" shouted Casper, trying to row toward the cave. But before the creatures could enter, the light inside the cave burst out, crossing the water like lightning. The twins stopped, suddenly real estate, as if they had been frozen in time. Eric, still inside the cave, saw the ethereal figure appear again. She looked at him with an almost grateful expression. The balance was restored. "You did what was needed. The abyss thanks you." He had no time to answer. The cave began to tremble, and Eric realized she was crumbling. He swam as fast as he could, leaving the cave as the stones fell behind him. When he finally emerged on the surface, the first thing he saw was Casper's relieved face, reaching out to pull him back to the boat. "Did you get it?" he asked with his eyes wide. "Yes," said Eric, still trying to recover his breath. "It's done. The jewelry was returned." The twins, who were once a constant and threatening presence, were now immovable, floating peacefully in the waters. Her red eyes went out, and her huge bodies began to sink slowly, disappearing into the lake. The group was silent, watching while the lake, which was once a terror scene, now seemed incredibly calm. Even the clouds in the sky seemed to dissipate, letting a ray of sunshine shine over the water. When they returned to the bank, the residents of the village were waiting. Hannah ran into her father's arms, sobbing with relief. "You came back, Dad. I knew you would come back." Eric hugged his daughter tightly, feeling the weight of everything that had finally happened to dissipate. "It's okay now," he said, more to himself than for her. That night, the whole village met in the tavern to hear the story of Eric. He told about the cave, the jewelry, and the balance that needed to be restored. Although some were still skeptical, most believed. Lake Svartvan, before a place of fear, was now seen with respect. Eric knew that the creatures were still there, somewhere in the background, but he also knew that as long as the balance were kept, they would not attack again. The weeks that followed the return of the jewelry were marked by a strange and unexpected calm in Myrkdalen. Svartman Lake, which was once a dreaded and mystery place, seemed to have returned to the state of peace that older fishermen said they had been decades ago. The waters no longer absorbed light as an endless abyss. On the contrary, they seemed to reflect the sky with almost supernatural tranquility. Eric became a hero for the village inhabitants. As much as many still had doubts about what really happened at the bottom of the lake, no one could deny that terror had ceased. The mysterious disappearances stopped, and the residents gradually began to reconnect with the lake. Some went back to fishing, although always with respect and caution, as if they knew that the waters had their own lives. That morning, while Eric ment his fishing nets in the backyard of his small cabin, Hannah played near the lake bank. Since the day it all happened, she seemed fascinated by Svartman. It was as if she felt that something had changed, something only children could see. "Dad," said Hannah, running to him with something in his hands. "Look it!" Eric looked up and saw that the girl was holding a plain black stone with small natural designs on her surface. He took the stone, examining it closely. "Where did you find that?" asked. "On the bank." "She was right there," said Hannah, pointing to a point where the soft waves licked the sand. Eric felt a shiver. The stone looked like something that could have come from the depths of the lake, but there was nothing threatening in it. Just a silent reminder that Lake Svartman still kept secrets that no one could fully understand. He returned the stone to Hannah with a smile. "Do you think they are still there?" she asked with curiosity in her eyes. Eric sighed and looked at the lake. "I think so, Hannah. But they won't hurt us as long as we respect their own." That night, the village held a small ceremony by the lake. It was not exactly a religious ritual, but a symbolic act of respect. Flowers were thrown into the water as a gesture of peace, and residents whispered old prayers, asking for protection for the future. Arvid, the old fisherman who had helped Eric, was beside him throughout the ceremony. "You know, boy," he said with his voice hoarse, "no matter how many mysteries we solve, Svartman will always be a special place. Not special in a good way, but special in a different way." "I know," said Eric, "but now at least we can live without fear." After the ceremony, the village began to rebuild its routine. Svartvan has become a place of silent fascination. No one dared to explore their depths again, and the fishermen never cast their nets near the area where the cave was located. 3 months later, Eric was visited by a man from outside the village. He wore a well-adjusted suit, clearly displaced in that simple place, and carried a leather paste. "Lord Nordahl?" asked the man as Eric left home to greet him. "It's me," said Eric cautiously. "My name is Henrik Dahl, work for the University of Oslo in the Department of Archaeology. We received reports about unusual events in this lake. I would like to hear your version." Eric crossed his arms, trying to evaluate man's intentions. "There is nothing to hear," he said. "It was just an exaggerated story of a small village." Henrik smiled, as if waiting exactly this answer. "I understand, but if you change your mind, look for me. Stories like this deserve to be preserved." He handed an Eric card before saying goodbye and disappearing along the winding road that led to the village. Eric knew he couldn't tell everything that had happened. Some things were better left as mysteries. He put the card in his kitchen drawer, but never intended to use it. That night, while putting Hannah to sleep, the girl asked one last question. "Dad, do you think the lake is happy now?" Eric thought for a moment before answering. "I think the lake is at peace, and when we respect peace, it respects us back." He kissed his daughter's forehead and turned off the light of the room, going to the porch of his house. There he sat in his rocking chair and looked at Svartvan Lake, now bathed in the moonlight. The waters were calm, but he knew that under the surface there were secrets that would never be revealed, and that, for Eric, was enough. 5 years later, Myrkdalen looked like a completely different village. The ancient fears in relation to Lake Svartman had dissipated, but respect for the place remained. The lake, previously avoided, was now considered a symbol of balance and resilience, something that defined the village itself. Erik Nordahl had ceased to be just a fisherman. He had become a respected figure in the community. Its history with the Black Waters was told among younger residents as a kind of local legend. Some details were omitted, of course, but the essential was there. Erik had faced the mysteries of the lake and restored peace. Hannah, now 12, was a curious and intelligent girl. She often helped her father with daily tasks, but had a special fascination with learning about the world beyond Myrkdalen. At school, she was known to tell lake stories with enthusiasm that made the most skeptical believed, at least for a moment. One morning, while Erik arranged his fishing nets in the backyard, Hannah came running with a letter in her hands. "Daddy, look at that!" Erik took the envelope, which featured the University of Oslo seal. He opened carefully and started reading. It was from Henrik Dahl, the archaeologist who had visited him years ago. In the letter, Henrik explained that he was organizing an expedition north of Norway to study local legends and would like to know more about Lake Svartman. He mentioned he had heard rumors about dark stones with inscriptions and legendary creatures, and offered Erik the opportunity to collaborate as a guide. "Are you going to answer, Dad?" Hannah asked, her eyes shining with expectation. Erik doubled the letter and thought for a moment. He knew that the lake kept secrets that should not be unearthed, but also knew that sharing part of the story could help preserve respect for that unique place. "I don't know yet," he said. "Some things are better left quiet, Hannah." The girl tilted her head confused. "But you said it's important to remember, not forget. Don't you want them to know how the lake was at peace?" Erik smiled. "Maybe someday, but for now it's our secret." The following years brought prosperity to Myrkdalen. The village began to attract tourists, curious about the stories of the lake and the stunning landscapes. For older residents, this external attention was uncomfortable, but Erik made sure no one exploited Svartman irresponsibly. He knew that despite peace, the twins were still there, silent in the depths, keeping the balance he had helped to restore. On a particularly cold winter night, Erik walked down the lake bank, as he often did, to reflect. The frozen surface gleamed in the moonlight, and the air was so quiet that he could hear the sound of his own steps over the snow. He stopped near the point where Jonas and Martin's boat had disappeared years ago. For a moment, he stared at the ice, wondering what could be happening below. Then something captured his attention. A slight shine, almost imperceptible, coming from the depths. It was as if the lake was thanking. Erik smiled at himself, put his hands in his pockets and returned home, feeling a strange sense of peace. Svartman Lake remained a mystery, and maybe it was better like that. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. We see each other in the next video.